Well, we're coming up on Valentine's Day, so what better time to talk about this next subject? Marriage. It's often so serene for the first 6 months or so, and then real life kicks in after the honeymoon fades, and we start to notice the faults that we all have, and the conflicts start to ramp up. So, how do you get things back on track? Our guests today are a husband and wife team, Alex and Heather Boersma. She's the author of Dream Big and is also a life coach. Alex is a business owner and real estate developer. Together, they're currently doing online training for couples on how to keep the romance going in your marriage. They join me via Zoom today from Winnipeg. Welcome to Bridge City News and Miracle Channel, Heather and Alex. So glad to have you on today.
Hi, thanks for having us.
Absolutely. So, Heather and Alex, how long have you been married, and has it been all roses and no thorns?
We've been married for 13 years, and there's definitely been some thorns in the last 13. Lots of roses, lots of thorns. I'd say both.
Yeah, for sure.
I think that's pretty typical, isn't it? So, what are some of the keys to a successful marriage and keeping the romance going?
Yeah, I think for us, the journey that we're on right now, a lot of it has to do with being really honest with each other and leaning into that. And I think that really helps cultivate intimacy and trust in your relationship. Because yeah, I don't know how else to say it. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's something that like you would assume that would be an answer to this question, but somewhere along the way we stopped being that honest with each other. And it wasn't that we were now telling each other lies. It was more that we were editing the things that we were saying to each other because we didn't want to upset the other person or because we were afraid of their reaction. So
Yeah.
when we talk about honesty, we're talking about like a level that we call it brutal honesty because sometimes it feels so scary to be that honest.
Yeah.
Right. Totally makes sense. So, as you're saying, the romance sometimes fades in marriage, right? And we may not even notice the signs. So, why do you think that is?
Well, I think it's kind of like what we were saying. It just happens over time. It's these little things that add up, or we stop putting in maybe the effort that we used to when we were dating or first married, and it's really easy to fall into routine. And I think that's where it's really important to notice those things and be intentional, because otherwise it's very comfortable sometimes to get complacent and to not put yourself out there, for the other person and for yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Heather, did you want to add to that?
I mean, I was just going to say that I think it's like the little tiny 1% changes in the wrong direction, right? So it doesn't have to feel like this big dramatic thing that happens. It's like instead of choosing to go sit together after the kids go to bed, we choose to sit in separate rooms. Like one time of that is not a big deal, but you do that every day for 10 years. And all of a sudden there can be a lot of disconnection from a very small choice like that.
Oh, absolutely. So once you start to notice the signs of that this is happening, how should a couple respond to this? What is the next step? I guess the first step is recognizing that it's even happening, right? So what's the next step?
Well, yeah, you're right. Like the first step is actually taking the time to look at your relationship and be honest with yourself and say, hey, is this what I want? And if it's not, like if you're being really honest with yourself, then the first step is to absolutely recognize that. And a lot of us don't actually even take the time, because sometimes maybe we're even scared to look at it because we don't want to admit to ourselves that maybe this isn't what we thought it would be after a year, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years of marriage. Maybe you had a picture of what that might look like, and if it doesn't look like that, that can be sometimes intimidating to look at. So step number one is absolutely look at it and be honest with yourself. And then from there, be honest with your partner as well and say, hey, this isn't what I wanted it to look like. And start to connect and dream together about what your relationship could look like, because it can. But if you don't take that time, it's not just going to magically change. It doesn't just happen in these big gestures of romance or something. It takes intentionality. And frankly, that has been a lot of fun, like a lot of fun. Like it sounds, it sounds scary, I think, at the front end, but for us, once we acknowledge that, hey, we want something more, we want something different, it actually got really exciting because we started to realize, yeah, that is available to us.
I like that. So you're almost mapping out what you want this to be like, and it's intentional. Interesting. I like that. So a suggestion that I heard once to rekindle the flame is to do something that you enjoyed together before you were married. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that kind of encompasses one of our kind of pillars, I think, in this process is play. Playing together is so important. And not just because it's fun, but because it builds trust and safety. When we play together as adults, we have to kind of put ourselves out there, be a bit silly, maybe make ourselves look a little foolish. And then when we do that, we put ourselves out there and we find that our partner is meeting us there and not rolling their eyes at us, but joining us in the play. It starts to create this amazing place of safety for both people. So whether that's like for us, we used to wakeboard together or water ski or downhill ski, like, and we can't do much of that right now, but when we can get out and do that, that's awesome. But even just like dancing in the kitchen or being silly together, or it can be in those little things too. It doesn't have to be limited to like an activity necessarily.
That's awesome. I was going to ask you for some examples, and you went ahead and gave me some. So that's great. So, what about doing something like a double date with another couple?
I think for me anyway, what I've been learning is it's not so much about the big planned things. I mean, those are great, whether that's a date or whether that's an outing, whatever. It's far more for us been about like connecting throughout the day. And when I get home, like Heather said, dancing, putting some music on and dancing in the kitchen, or sitting together if we're watching TV in the same room and talking, or going outside in the hot tub. Like we have a hot tub, so just go out there and connect and chat about like what's going on, how are you feeling, what are you working on, like all these things. I think it's less about the events and more about the little choices of leaning in.
Yeah, it's about the intention, right? So if your intention in going on a double date is to like connect with each other and the other couple, I think that's amazing. Like, I think that's a great way to build connection amongst all of you. But just as much, it's like Alex said, like, let's go sit on the couch and intentionally talk about what's on our hearts together. That intention really shapes the whole experience.
I love that. I hear that marriage experts say one of the most important things for a woman in marriage is for the man to make sure he spends quality time communicating with his wife. So is this true? What are some of the ways that a man can do this?
Well, it's just, I think it kind of goes back to the theme that we're starting to learn for ourselves is that honesty is so important. Like the man needs to, at least for us, like I've really leaned into being uncomfortably honest with Heather about how I'm feeling or what I'm thinking. And at first that feels a little bit scary, but the more I'm doing it, the more I'm finding out about how big Heather's heart is for me. And it's met with a lot of love and safety. And so, I think communicating and being honest, being vulnerable is so important in all of this.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's also making sure that as the other partner, whether the husband or the wife, because I think that honest communication is important for both. Maybe it's easier and more natural for the woman to communicate that way, but not necessarily. But committing to not make what the other person is saying about you. Like when Alex talks, whatever he's saying, even if he's talking about me, he's sharing about who he is. He's sharing about his heart. So I commit to not taking that personally. I commit to not getting defensive and not making that about me. And that creates a safe place for him to be able to be that honest. So if you want your partner to be that honest, you're also committing to not make it personal.
Right. That sounds like that sounds hard and a lot of work. And I was going to ask, like, are we talking brutal honesty? Like, how brutally
It's
honest
super
can you
hard.
get?
Yeah.
And how does the other person not get offended? How do you know, avoid that?
Well, and when we talk about brutal honesty, we're not really necessarily saying direct that at the other person. I mean more like I'm going to be brutally honest about my fears, about my insecurities, about my desires. And that's what I want from Alex too, is to be like, I'm scared about this. Or I had this thought and I didn't want to tell you, but now I'm going to. Like that kind of honesty, not like you did this and you did that.
Yeah.
And I mean that comes up too, but that's kind of not really the focus that we're trying to have. We're trying to be more honest about our own stuff with each other.
It's more about that honesty of what's going on inside our own hearts, not so much about how the other person is acting or anything like that. It's more about being honest about where you're at, not explaining the person is affecting you one way or the other, because that doesn't help anyone. And a big part of that for us has been, frankly, like working on ourselves individually.
Yeah.
Like as you start to learn more about who you are individually outside of your relationship, and learn how to be I guess how to mature and learn how to manage your or feel your emotions and manage your thoughts, you're able to show up in a way that is very non-confrontational. Like it's not this, for us, it's not a confrontational thing. It's more like what Heather said, talking about what's going on inside our hearts.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so we talked about communication. Now, experts also say that one of the most important things for men is to be respected. So, what does that look like, practically speaking? How can a wife show respect to her husband, and also vice versa?
Well, I mean, I think like respect is just not, it's the same answer. It's that honesty thing. Like it's I respect Heather enough to be fully me and not some fake version of me. And all I ask of her is for her to be fully her, and to be a safe place for her to show up as the woman that she is. And so, for personally, that doesn't resonate maybe in the traditional sense nearly as much as it does for some. But for me, what I found is that as long as I feel safe to continually show up as vulnerable as I am, and Heather's meeting me there, that's better than anything I could have imagined. It's love, which is far more desirable than respect in my mind.
Now, over time, we can start getting critical of one another. Any advice on how to fight fair?
Well, I think my biggest fight fair advice is to, like I said, remember that when someone else is talking, they're revealing their heart, right? So out of the overflow of my heart, my mouth speaks. So even if I'm saying something about him, that's revealing who I am. And that's, I think, what allows you to not take it personally, is when you remember they're just showing me who they are. So if he says, like, Heather, I wish you would do this, or I wish you wouldn't do that, I can go, okay, what I hear you saying is repeat it back to him, right? But if I'm feeling defensive and making it about me, I'll start going, well, I did it because of this and I did it because of that. And then I've now just engaged in that conflict rather than listening and creating the safe space. So same thing with Alex. When I communicate how I'm feeling, he often just says to me, tell me more. Is there anything else? And then I'm like, oh, okay, I thought I was mad, but now I just feel like I can actually share like my fears and my concerns. And then I start to understand myself better too. So really actively listening to the other person and repeating back to them what you hear them saying before jumping to your own defense.
I like that. Nothing will make you grow more than marriage, will it?
Oh my gosh, that is very true.
Yeah.
Right. And then also
Relationships tend to have that effect on us.
yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah. And then how do you avoid taking the other person for granted? And it's probably the same answer, right?
Yeah, it's like, for me, what I've found is that the more I've opened up, the more I've appreciated Heather, and so it's just not even on my radar. It's like I'm constantly being surprised at how wonderful and incredible she is, and so um, I think it's leaning into that, just being open. Stay open, and I think you'll be very surprised about how you're met.
Yeah. And I think the other one I would add to that is like change your routine. Even if it's just in a small way, do something different, put yourself in a setting that you aren't always in, break that pattern, whether it's like a healthy or unhealthy pattern, doesn't really matter. Just like change it up, because when we change it up, we give ourselves the opportunity to see new sides of each other. And that's when we start not taking it for granted, because we're like, oh, I didn't know this about you, but I probably never would have discovered it about you had we just kept doing the same thing over and over again.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
That's good.
Great advice. Well, thanks so much for your time today, Alex and Heather. Appreciate having you on.
Thank you for having us and for having this conversation. It's so important.
Absolutely. Heather Boersma is the author of Dream Big, and you can check out the online training being offered by Alex and Heather on how to keep the romance going in your marriage. Happy Valentine's to you too this weekend.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Absolutely. I'm Jeanette Roche on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thanks for watching.